Vanguard!
Built to entertain the masses, Extreme Battlers were created to give one hell of a show. These new fighting machines are the newest hits for the Nova Grappler circuit and are incredibly popular among young kids. But among these powerful new robots, one stands tall among them and shows extraordinary fighting potential. This Extreme Battler that's currently going undefeated is known as Extreme Battler Victor. Extreme Battler Victor returns Nova Grappler to its roots, which means old-fashioned restanding shenanigans. However, this machine takes things to the extreme as Victor got two powerful abilities to support this playstyle. Whenever Victor enters the field, he can superior call an Extreme Battler grade 2 or lower from the top 7 cards from the deck. This is great to get an extra unit on the board without having to sacrifice cards from hand. But this is just the start of it all, as when Victor attacks, he truly goes into overdrive, as for the cost of a single counterblast and a single soul blast, he can restand any of his rearguards, giving him access to more attacks. But if that unit already stood this turn by another effect, then Victor gains an additional drive check, thus swinging in with a triple drive Vanguard attack. This skill is great to enable even more attacks while also generating more pressure and card advantage, which can be used the following turns. Victor is a simplistic unit, it gains advantage and it can reset a rearguard for more attacks. This has to do with the fact that Victor's true potential isn't solely within himself, but within the Extreme Battlers around him. So let's take a look at this new engine. The main Extreme Battler is Extreme Battler Dos Sledge. This card can become stronger and stronger each and every single time it restands. Normally he's a 9k unit. After the first restand it becomes a 19k, after the second restand it generates soul, which can refund the cost of Victor or some other skills, and finally when it restands for a third time it becomes a 29k attacker with the Sentinel Guard restrict. This is our main unit to restand to gain maximum value, and it's most likely on an accel circle, giving it an additional 5k power for every single attack. The second Extreme Battler is Extreme Battler Gunbaru Gun. This gives us access to a powerful attacker that can restand our units. It costs a soul, synergizing nicely with Dos Sledge as it can effectively become free with the soul it generates on the second restand. Another Extreme Battler we've got is Extreme Battler Soul Saucer. This can be a nice right target, but it can also be a great unit to restand on an accel circle, as it can be a 13k and 23k attacker, thus overcoming defensive triggers. If we don't have access to a Dos Sledge, then this is probably our ideal restand target within the Extreme Battler archetype. The final Extreme Battler is Extreme Battler Arshid. This is the great free searcher, and ideally you want to call him from hand. But if you get him off of Victor's top 7, then it isn't that bad, as you already are on a grade 3. But only call him if it's the only Extreme Battler in those top 7 cards. Now of course Victor and Gunbaru aren't the only units to restand our attackers, as we also have Cool Hank. This once again can be a nice Vanguard right target, but he is also a great restander, as he allows us to restand our units even if we have no soul or counterblast left to work with, which can help us when we're in a pinch or when we need a final bit of firepower. The final restander that we have access to is our trusted companion Kick Typhoon. This is yet another on-attack restander, which together with Cool Hank and Gunbaru completes the trifecta, as we can restand any unit for either a counterblast, a soul, or a discard. This gives us a nice arrangement of cost, so we can distribute our resources as we might see fit. Speaking of resources, Nova Grappler is known for heavy resource usage, and that is definitely the case for Victor. Every extra attack that we will do costs us at least one resource of any type, be it counterblast, soul, or cards. Now of course Victor is the most expensive among them, as he costs a counterblast and soul blast. But if done right, he also gets an extra card in the form of an extra drive check. Now this might sound like a resource nightmare, as we're bound to blast through them fast, but it doesn't have to be the case, as we have plenty of ways to recoup our resources. Those slides can generate soul while we're multi-attacking. Victor can generate cards through drive checking, but we can also rely on Shout for more soul or Claydol Mechanic for more counterblast. And beyond those examples, there are many more ways to generate some kind of resources, one being more successful than others, of course. So the trick is having a fair balance of units that generate resources, but try to also spread the usage of those resources. Now, if we want to talk about triggers, it's probably easy to say that you want to go for crits. You're going to reset a single unit multiple times, so fronts will be less effective, and that unit swinging 2 or maybe 3 times with an extra crit is a lot more devastating. Now, that said, a lot of your attacks besides the main attacker is going to be relatively low, same as for Victor himself, which is only 12k. So with it in mind, fronts wouldn't be such a bad idea in the face of a defensive trigger that could stop most of your attacks. So determine what you value the most in choosing fronts or crits. As for accel markers, it's obvious that accel 2 is the more superior one because of the extra draw. Victor relies on multiple pieces to function. If it doesn't have those, the deck will severely be crippled. But that said, if you find yourself in a scenario where you hold all the pieces in your hand and you can reset a dose sledge multiple times, then it can happen that accel 1 can be better choice simply of the extra 5k power on top of every single attack. So weigh your options the moment you ride into Victor. Now, with the core mechanic explained, let's dive into the different ways that we can potentially build Victor, and we begin with an Extreme Battler heavy list. As we can see here, we have the entire Extreme Battler package, including the 2 extra restanders, Cool Hank and Kick Typhoon. This gives us access to the restand target Dose Sledge as well as the backup unit Soul Saucer, and we can restand all of our units thanks to the help of Victor, Cool Hand, Kick Typhoon and Ganbaru Gun. This will of course require a lot of cards and resources to do, and in order to compensate for that, we run the added grade 1s. Claydol mechanic is our main way to refront the counterblast we use for Victor and Kick Typhoon, but in a really dicey situation, he can give us an extra card. So if we're in top decking mode, he can help us to get that 1 extra unit from our deck. The second resource generator is Screaming and Dancing Announcer Shout. This card can be used to either get us soul or cards in hand. Both are perfect outcomes for us in this particular build. And of course, it will do the same for our opponent, but on average, we will probably be able to generate way more value out of those resources than our opponent. And in some cases, it can remove defensive triggers. The main idea of this deck is to set up a Dose Sledge and restand it at least 3 times to get all of its effects. Now, to optimally gain value off of Dose Sledge, you want to restand it with the Vanguard for its second restand. This allows us to gain the extra drive checks, but it also means that we have the most attacks possible afterwards with the potential trigger power and criticals. Keep in mind that when you do this, you will generate soul with Dose Sledge the moment it restands via the Vanguard. So if you only have 1 soul and you have a Ganbaru Gun, as long as you can restand the Dose Sledge with something else, you should be able to pay for the Ganbaru Gun after you restand it with the Victor's ability. The overall nature of this deck is relatively simple, but we start to get into complicated territory when we look at generating the right numbers to overcome defensive triggers. And in some cases this is not possible, but always try to make more than 1 attack hit over defensive trigger. If you have 2 accel circles and you call a Kick Typhoon to 1, think twice before giving the 5k power to Dose Sledge. It might be more beneficial to give it to another unit which allow it to still hit. For example, Ganbaru Gun needs to attack the Vanguard in order to resolve the restand, so giving him the 5k power can turn him into a 26k attack if it's boosted by an 8k grade 1, thus overcoming a potential defensive trigger. So think twice before acting, as it takes practice to navigate through a fight at extreme speed. Now that we've seen the basics in action, let's add a different engine to Victor to give the deck a bit more firepower and a different way to generate resources. So in this build, we added a small portion of the Beast DT engine to the Victor core, as we can see Brutal Jack, which enables us to have a great rearguard beater. This can be a nice mid-battle attack that can still overcome defensive triggers, but in some cases can be an excellent restand target. This effectively fulfills the same role as the now removed Soul Saucer, but it also is just a great beater in any situation. To support Brutal Jack, we run Beast DT Scarlet Bird. This card enables us to use Brutal Jack multiple times in a row, and interesting enough, Scarlet Bird can change a single soul into a draw, and as we've learned, those resources hold the same value in this deck, as both can give us an extra attack, but this draw can also help us to get 2 combo pieces or potentially a future right target. So in reality, we actually gain value without gaining resources. As far as this build plays out, it effectively functions the same as the previous list, only now we have access to a much better generic beater, which can help us to be more aggressive in the early game, thus thus making the other low numbers less problematic in the late game. And Scarlet Bird is also a nice tech against stunned Mega Conley and Zambaku matches. We have one more list that uses the same principles but apply them in a different manner, thus resulting in a different build. This list is quite different from the previous ones. For one, we don't see a resource generators and we see another grade 3. That being Ultra Beast Deity Illuminal Dragon. This card can be a nice beater whenever your opponent tries to go for a defensive trigger, thus making your lower attacks more effective as they are less likely to take an attack. But this is also a nice right target. The reason we write Victor is for the extra restand and the extra drive checks, but ideally that drive check is to potentially hit a trigger to give the power to our Dose Sledge, which will restand multiple times. That said, because of the mechanic of Victor, we first attack with Dose Sledge 2 times in order to get the extra drive check power. Because of this, we will lose out on 2 potential attacks that could benefit from trigger power. Illuminal Dragon as a Vanguard can be the first attack, or at the very least attack before you even attack with the Dose Sledge, thus giving every attack the potential increase of any of the 2 triggers. But thanks to Illuminal's Vanguard ability, we don't even need to lose out on the extra attack, as we can restand Dose Sledge whenever our opponent blocks his attack. And when they do, it also gains 10k power for the rest of the turn, which mimics the potential power of a third drive check. So if we want to go with a trigger stacking strategy, then Illuminal Dragon is a much better Vanguard depending on the scenario. To add on top of that, we also play Drill the Duel. If we boost the Dose Sledge with Duel, it means every attack needs 2 cards from hand. This can make the first couple of attacks that would be weak still threatening, as they need to waste more shield than necessary, and then once it picks up power, its PG guard restrict will kick in, making it an annoying card to guard no matter its attack. And we don't need to lose out on power, as we can just call a Kicking Typhoon to an Accel Circle and then give the Dose Sledge the extra 5k power. The final new inclusion is the additional of the normal PGs. This is done so we can go all in on our crits, increasing the chance of either hitting a crit early game or having a Dose Sledge with 2 crits for every single attack it might have. Before we sign off this spotlight, there is one special card that I want to highlight, which is another Japanese promo, Giant Elephant Battler Payon Mask. This is a great card to address one of the biggest issues for Victor, aka the weaker side columns as well as the Vanguard attack. This grade 2 allows us to give our Vanguard as well as this unit an additional 10k power for free, as we're going to restand every single turn anyways with every single unit. This can make the 2 extra attacks hit over defensive triggers, and in the case they don't hit one, this then will result in them wasting a lot more shield, as your Vanguard becomes 35k with triple drive if boosted by an Arashid. Victor as a deck has a simple yet effective design. Try to restand as many times to overwhelm the opponent, but the specific approach you might take can wildly diverge from one another. There are many different cards and tactics out there that I haven't even touched upon, so it's now your turn to take control over this massive battle robot and carve your signature on the battlefield. Use this video as a starting point to develop your own build, as all the information in this video were designed to give you guys a core foundation of information needed to start building a deck for this particular boss unit. So with that notion, try to experiment with different cards, different strategies, as well as other trigger lineups and maybe marker choice to develop your own personal playstyle. If you like this type of content and you want to see more deck spotlights on different boss units, then check out this playlist where we go over many other boss units, including the other boss units of VBT11 Storm of the Blue Cavalry. So if you're hungry for more content like this, then definitely check out those videos on the channel. This video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon as well. With that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.